Welcome back, everybody, to the Educational AD podcast and our Super Tuesday segments featuring our panel of 10 great athletic experts. We'll get to today's special guest, but first we want to give a shout out to all of our sponsors. Now, these are companies that I used as an athletic director. You should be using them too. Stay with us for the next 3 minutes. Don't hit that fast forward button. We'll be right back. We want to thank Athletic Surveys for their support. If you've never used a survey to take the pulse of your parents, your student athletes, or even your coaches, you're really missing out. Athletic directors already hear back from the complainers. Athletic Surveys will connect you to that group, but it'll also connect you to the 98% of your parents, your students that really support and love your program. And that's a tremendously valuable tool to have when you're talking with a frustrated parent or your principal or your school board. Go to athleticsurveys.com. They're going to create a custom survey. Like I said, it'll let you take the pulse of your parents and your student athletes. That's athleticsurveys.com. We also want to say thanks to Huddle. Go to huddle.com. Change the way you see the game. As a football coach, I used Huddle for years, but when I became an athletic director, I made sure that our school was a Huddle school. And our coaches just loved the tools that Huddle provided that let them coach our kids up to their highest level. Go to huddle.com, join the 8 million users, and turn your school into a Huddle school. We also want to say thanks to Snap Raise. Have you ever spent days and weeks with a fundraiser with little, if any, return? Stop right here. Go to snapraise.com/EDAD. It's hands down the best online fundraising platform out there. We used it at our school with tremendous success, and so will you. They also have a tremendous suite of platforms like Snap Store, Snap Sponsor, FanX. That's a great one. Check them all out at snapraise.com. We want to say thanks to Home Campus, the exclusive high school and state association management platform for us. It's also your one-stop platform for things like scheduling, athletic eligibility and clearance, all the things that go with that. You can even show parents how to upload forms themselves and a whole lot more. To get started, all you have to do is go to homecampus.com. That's homecampus.com. We want to thank Sideline Interactive, indoor score tables and video boards. Go to sidelineinteractive.com and schedule a live web demo to see their score tables and their scoreboards in action. Probably one of the best purchases I ever made as an athletic director. Go to sidelineinteractive.com. Check out all of their great products and services. Sidelineinteractive.com. We want to thank Hometown Ticketing, the leading digital ticketing provider to schools and colleges. I don't think I need to say anything more, but I will. Hometown is digital ticketing that offers more support, more security, more customization. Go to hometownticketing.com. Their team is here to make the best online ticketing solution for you. hometownticketing.com. We want to say thanks to Gipper for their support. Gipper is the official social media management platform for the podcast. And if you go to Gipper.com, their team is going to show you how to create world-class marketing content for your social media channel. You should be celebrating your teams and promoting your athletes. Your kids are on social media, so should you. Gipper's trusted by over 3,000 athletic departments across the country. It's professional graphic design made simple. How simple? So simple, even I can use it. Go to Gipper.com to get started. And we want to say thanks to Vital Signs Wall of Fame. If you're looking for a really cool way to display your school record boards for all the teams, for all the sports, or your school's Hall of Fame, or simply bring your school's legacy to life, go to vitalsignswalloffame.com. Mention the podcast, you'll get a nice discount. Their interactive touchscreen video consoles are just a tremendous way to showcase your school's diverse history and your proudest moments. That's vitalsignswalloffame.com. Check them out today. Welcome back, everybody, to the Educational AD podcast and our new Super Tuesday team of experts. We've got a group of individuals. They've all been on the podcast before, and they're all going to contribute in their own unique way. Today's guest, we call a friend of the show, Nathan Whitaker. If you haven't listened to his interview with us, you should go back because it was a great one. But he's got a tremendous background as an athlete, as an executive. He's got a Super Bowl ring. And oh, by the way, he's also a multi best-selling author. He's a national, international speaker. And we're just so grateful to have him on this team. Nathan Whitaker, welcome back to the Educational AD podcast.
Thanks, Jake. It was great to be here. And if I'd known you were going to team me up with that, I would have worn the ring. But I'm glad to be here. Thanks so much.
Well, again, for our listeners, if you're new to this, every Tuesday we have a member of our team on, and they basically share a topic that is speaking to them. So, Nate, what do you got for our listeners this week?
Well, great. And, it's funny, I'm this being an election year and all, Super Tuesday brings something else to mind. So I'm glad we're talking leadership and athletics and how that might apply to our lives in other ways. That seems like a safer realm to be in these days. But thanks so much. So yeah, I wanted to talk a little bit today on leadership from the standpoint of being an introvert. And it's something I've spoken on a number of times lately. I've spoken to coaches on it, spoken to business leaders with the idea that either they might be somewhat introverted, or they might be coaching kids or working with employees or whatever who are introverted. And I think it's an important thing to wrestle with. There's a great book that came out a little over a decade ago. One of my classmates in law school, she was actually a year ahead of me, Susan Cain, wrote a book called Quiet about the power of introverts and the like. And I think it's worth at least thinking about, because if we're not introverted, we at least know somebody who is. And so for me, one of the fundamental things to think about at the beginning is just this idea that this idea of being extroverted or introverted is really kind of a spectrum that so often, at least for me, it's been approached in a binary form in the past, where either I'm an introvert or I'm an extrovert, and therefore people make assumptions or I make assumptions about myself. And so I think it's worth, one, thinking about it as a spectrum, and two, then what does it mean to be an introvert? And it's one thing to be shy. Like, there are a number of times in social settings where a bunch of strangers, and certainly some people are just great at social settings. Other times, kind of some of us might fumble through those. I'm certainly that type. But that's not necessarily being introverted. The idea, the definition I've heard that really resonates from a number of folks is this idea: it's where we derive our energy. And so is it being by myself? Is it reading a book? Is it whatever, where I kind of get renewed and restored? Or is it being in that setting? I might be an introvert who's great in cocktail settings or social events or whatever, but I need to realize that I need to come out of that and find a way to reground myself and re-energize myself. Or I may be an extrovert who's not particularly great in social settings, but that doesn't mean, but I'm getting energized. It doesn't mean that I'm always going to think of the right things to say. So I think that's worth thinking of. One, it's where the definition is, I think, where we derive our energy. And then two, understanding that it's a spectrum. And then people, by the way, I've learned in my research, people kind of in the middle toward the top are called ambiverts. And they're people who derive energy either through social gatherings or then being a little more by themselves. And so people are often surprised. I do a lot of speaking, workshops, other things. People are surprised to hear that I would put myself on the introverted end of the spectrum. I'm not sure how far out, because I certainly do like being, and I get some energy out of being in groups. But I do find that when I go and speak, a lot of times the event will end and they'll say, "Hey, can you come? And would you love to come to lunch with us or dinner with us or whatever?" And it feels like I should. Somebody's flown me in, and so I do take those opportunities to do that. But I often find myself, if I get some free time, or if they, "Hey, I'm so sorry, but we're not going to be able to do dinner with you," I think, thank goodness. And I'll go and sit on my hotel room bed and have a pizza on my lap, and just have a moment to recover from being kind of in the middle of everything and wrapped up with things and the like. So it's interesting. Some people find it interesting. For me, it makes total sense that I can thrive in those settings, but then I have to rejuvenate kind of being by myself in a darkened closet in my hotel room. Not quite. So with all that as background, does all this make sense? Are you tracking me?
No, I'm right there
good?
with you. And again, you speak far more extensively than I do, but very much the same thing. When you're presenting, for me, it's usually to a group of parents or coaches or ADs. you're on, and you've got kind of that on persona. You're not that way 24/7. And I think I'm more of that introvert, unless I'm with all my friends, that sort of thing. But with other people, yeah, I tend to hang back and listen to the conversation, and not try, like some of my friends, they'll be in that group and they're holding court, to use a term. That's
Right.
just not me. When I'm presenting, I can be that person, but when the presentation's over, no, I'm going back. So I know right what you're talking about.
Yeah, yeah, totally. Okay, great. And even it's interesting too. My wife would love to, go find a social function and let's go be in the middle of everything. And I'd rather find those 3 or 4 people I know well and hang out in that corner and whatever it may be. So of course we're always navigating those things. And I think it was Carl Jung, I understand, came up with this idea of introversion and extroversion. And he was saying that if we were all the way at one end of the spectrum or the other, we probably wouldn't be able to function in society at all. That is, if we couldn't handle people at all and couldn't get any energy, or if all we wanted to do was be around, he was saying most of us are probably more in that somewhere, toward that bell curve. But with that as kind of a foundation, a background, just want to talk a little bit about leadership, because I think so often people assume that we have this idea of the business leader, the coach, whatever, the always in the middle of everything, loud, boisterous, thrives on groups, whatever it may be. And I'm not sure that's always the best model to think about. And in fact, when we think about some of the great qualities as leaders, right? Casting a vision, being empathetic, being a good listener, analyzing information, processing information, helping people understand their roles, encouraging people, is some of those come naturally to extroverts. Some of those may come a little more naturally to introverts, right? I mean, I often think about people sitting in a meeting and you find somebody sitting off on the side and they haven't said a word and they're nodding and you're thinking, okay, that person is processing everything. And when they finally do speak, I'm going to listen because I can tell that they're taking it all in. And so I think there are some things that extroverts necessarily do well, or that come to them naturally or give them energy, and introverts also. And so I don't think we should disqualify either one or say, hey, you know what, I'll never be a great leader because I really don't want to be the life of the party and I don't want to be in the big group and I'd rather hang back and therefore I can't be a leader. Well, if you think about leadership as being influence, there's no reason why the introvert can't be just as effective in influencing people, casting a vision, helping them. And so I think both sides, one of the things that's helpful is to think about what are some of the things that that leadership requires, and are those things that come to me naturally? For instance, if I'm quicker to speak, maybe I should decide, is it worth sitting back a little bit, processing, taking things in, and making sure I've heard everybody before I jump in with my thoughts? Or at the same time, if I'm not the type to want to run around and encourage people, because that drains me, do I just, one, need to get over it and then build into my schedule a chance to go sit in that darkened closet or whatever it may be, and know that I need to derive some energy after I've been kind of working my way around and dealing with the group? Or or should I be or should I find other means? I mean, for instance, a friend texted me yesterday that I haven't heard from in 18 months. And he had no reason. He just wanted to say, hey, I was thinking about you and really enjoy your friendship. And it was such a rush. And I thought, I can do that, even kind of on the introverted side of things. That doesn't suck any energy out of me to sit there and encourage people. And so are there ways that I can do that and that don't necessarily take energy? So I think when we think of leadership qualities, I think we shouldn't discount anybody just because some of those things come naturally and some don't, that we all have things that we can work on. And then that leads me into this idea of authenticity. And I read the other day, it was like 2023's word of the year or something, which I think is great. Of course, we're going to overuse, like anything else, right? Culture and whatever, we can overuse things to death until we struggle to find their meaning. But I do think it's worth thinking through this idea of being authentic, that we see it with football coaches, right? I've talked to so many coaches who are, that Nick Saban, unbelievable coach, amazing with what he's done and sustained over and over. And so coaches will think, well, that's what I need to be. And one of the things in working with Tony Dungy was that he said, I really hope that people will see that there are different models and different ways to do things, and that somebody doesn't have to be like me and quiet and stoic and whatever it may be. That Tony models. He said, but I don't think that somebody needs to necessarily say, okay, well, now that I'm a coach or now that I'm in this position, I need to be Nick Saban. If they're wired to be Coach Saban, great. If they're wired to be Tony, great. But we need to understand that that's not exactly how I'm wired, and that doesn't disqualify me. I don't need to become somebody else. It may last for a little while if I try to become Coach Saban, but it's not going to last for long because I can't sustain it, and it's not going to feel authentic. And others are going to look at me and finally go, this guy's kind of a phony in the way he's always acting and the way he's whatever. So I think it's important to be authentic and to understand what that means. Good friend of ours, Brian Shelton, former head coach at the University of Florida men's tennis, and Brian is the only, at least only Division I coach who has coached the national championship college team on the women's side at Georgia Tech, and then national championship on the men's side at the University of Florida. And so Brian's an amazing leader, amazing coach, amazing teacher, but Brian is well over on the introverted side. And when I have given this talk, I've got a slide. It's a great classic photo. UF has just won the national championship. They've just beaten Baylor. They're all excited. They're on the court. They're holding the trophy up, and there's the whole group. And Brian's off to the side with everybody, big grin on his face, and everybody's got a finger up or this or whatever. And Brian's just kind of smiling and sitting back. And I thought that really sums up Brian. And one of the interesting things about Brian is that he has now resigned from UF this last year in order to coach his son, Ben, full time. And so Ben won a national championship at Florida on the individual side and team side. And Ben has now risen to number 15 in the world on the pro tennis tour. So it's been an amazing run for Ben. And Ben is the opposite of Brian. And Ben is boisterous, loud. He looks at the crowd and he gets them up and he does all this. And meanwhile, he'll look over at Brian and Brian will smile. And every now and then you'll see Brian clap. And it's really funny to watch the two interact. And I talked to Brian about this concept of introverted leadership and the like. And he confirmed, of course, that he is definitely on the introverted side. And Ben had won a big tournament about 2 months ago in Tokyo. And a big breakthrough for Ben to win this professional tennis tournament. And that bumped him up to number 15 in the world. And Brian said, though, I have mixed feelings about that because Ben was experimenting with a different style of play. And so Ben was trying to be more like me. And so Ben was quiet and he didn't get the crowd involved. And Brian said, I found myself watching him thinking, I almost wish he'd lose so that he would get the feedback of, you just got to be yourself. Mm-hmm. So he went on to win the tournament, but Brian said, I don't think that's who you should be. I think you should stay authentic to the extrovert that you are and be that way. And because that's going to energize you, that's going to give you excitement, enthusiasm, whatever it is. And I think that's true for us as leaders. That's true for us in whatever role we're in. We got to figure out kind of what gives us energy, where we should be, and okay, there are ways to shore that up. Great, but to understand that it's okay to be different ways and have different skill sets, and just work through that and understand that some things will come naturally to me, some won't, and that's okay.
Well, and again, you've already alluded to it that leadership, like anything else, it's on a spectrum. So maybe. He's going to find that happy medium between, focused concentration and going crazy, getting the crowd involved too. And you mentioned Tony Dungy. For listeners, if you're not familiar, with Nathan, he's done a series of best-selling books and really, truly best-selling books with Tony Dungy. He served on Tony's staff when the Tampa Bay Bucs won a Super Bowl. That's where that Super Bowl ring came from. And great example of the quiet, let's say more cerebral approach to coaching. But I'll bet Tony can get fired up at the right moments. If our listeners wanted to reach out and find out, more about your books and more about Nathan Whitaker, as I mentioned, Nathan's a national, international speaker. You'd be well served to have him come in and talk to your community, your coaches, your parents. How do they find out more about Nathan Whitaker?
So I've got a website that's simply my name. It's www.nathanwhitaker.com. It's Whitaker with one T is the only trick there. NathanWhitaker.com. My wife calls it my shrine to me. but I've got some stuff there where you can reach out to me and see some excerpts of me speaking and a little bit more information about the books. And Tony and I did have we had a leadership book hit number 3 on the New York Times list. And Tony, actually, this is typical Tony, our first book, his memoir, hit number 1 on the New York Times list. And so when the leadership book came out a couple years later and only hit number 3, he actually apologized sincerely to the publisher. I'm so sorry this didn't do better. And meanwhile, Tony and I, of course, we didn't exactly know what we were doing and realized that, of course, we're in very rarefied air at that point. But sweet Tony was, I'm so sorry we didn't hit number 1 again. So anyway, it's been a fun run with Tony, and it's been fun to get out and to speak. And so, sure, if anybody wanted that, I'd love to talk to them about that opportunity.
Okay. So NathanWhitaker.com. And again, the initial book with Tony, that was Quiet Strength, correct?
Yes.
Okay. Well, Nathan, thanks so much for sharing today. Great stuff. Always fun to hang out with you. All the best with the coming year. And thanks again for being on the podcast.
Thanks, Jake. It's great to be a part of Super Tuesday.
For our listeners, we do this every single week, and we also upload the Zoom recordings to the Educational AD podcast channel. Of course, we appreciate you listening. Come back next week for another great guest, and just about every day for new content on the Educational AD podcast. We'll see you next time. Wow, what a great session. Get in touch with Nate, NateWhitaker.com, and his books. Again, the Tony Dungy, the initial book, Quiet Strength, all available on Amazon. Before we go, we do want to thank all of our great sponsors, Athletic Surveys by Lifetrack, Sideline Interactive, Huddle, Hometown Ticketing. We want to say thanks to Gipper, Vital Signs Wall of Fame, Snap, Raise, and Home Campus. Again, these are all companies that I used as an athletic director. You should be using them too. Thanks again for listening. We'll see you next week on another Super Tuesday and just about every day on the Educational AD podcast. Thanks for listening.